My Michelle Live podcast.
Looking for the God story and news of the day. My Michelle Live News and Views. Here's Michelle.
Hey, glad to be hanging out with you today. Boy, what a topic we're taking on. We have so many issues in our world, and we're so passionate about trying to find answers. We're activists. We want to make a difference. Gen Z in particular, that's their passion. So, what have we used to be at the base of the hope for tomorrow? Education. We'll educate. We'll indoctrinate. We'll let you be informed. And if you're informed, it will change everything. Sin will be eradicated. Oh, but wait. There is definitely more to that story. And we're going to take that story from a different view. A view from Jerusalem.
And now, A View from Jerusalem with Rabbi Adlerstein.
Rabbi Yitzchok Adlerstein, our beloved rabbi. He's with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the director of interfaith affairs, and a friend to this program, and such a delight to connect with you again this month.
It's really great to be with you, and I think this is the first time we're trying Zoom as a way of communicating. And I just get an instant high by watching you. I wish your listeners could see you in action. That enthusiasm is not just in your voice, but in all of your body language. It's great. You're better than a cup of coffee.
I love seeing this face-to-face interaction. It's wonderful. Thank you, technology. Technology is awesome, and it's brought to us by intelligent people. And I think there's this idea that if we can acquiesce to science, if we can put our faith in the technocrats, those who know best, that we can have a betterment for society and we can eradicate a lot of ills. But a brand new scientific survey has confirmed a big issue, that we used to think that education would mean less bigotry in a specific sense relevant to this study towards Jews. Those who were more educated in surveys were found to have less hatred, less bigotry. But there was a study by 3 professors and reported in Tablet magazine that showed that more education may lead to greater, not lesser, Jew hatred, and maybe even a more dangerous hatred because they have more education and more ways to devise, ways to find outlets for hate. This is huge.
Indeed. And the Jewish community had a lot riding on this for decades. The strategy and the policy of many Jewish organizations was to push for more education, because the presumption was that bigotry was the province of sort of like the intellectually challenged, those who didn't get it or those who didn't have the proper education were more likely to seek targets, to seek whipping boys for their own frustration. But when people were faced with the facts, they would drop their hatred of Jews, but the hatred of Blacks, the hatred of Latinos. I can't tell you about any surveys about Blacks and Latinos, but we now have a survey done by 3 professors. It doesn't seem that any of them are Jewish, who said, wait a second, it could be that many of these results in previous decades were not really measuring a lack of bigotry and hatred, but a clever response by the people they were polling to give the socially desirable answer. This is a phenomenon that we know we've been talking about in America for quite a while. It was a really hot issue in the months before the presidential election, because some of the polls were discounted as underestimating the number of people who would vote for the incumbent, for Donald Trump, because they
Yes.
knew that the mood of social scientists was they're looking for the right answer. And the right answer was supposed to be that, no, you can't vote for that guy. He's crazy and a bigot. But people were saying that's what people were saying in the polls, but that wasn't going to be the way they would vote. And in fact, that was confirmed. The election was far closer than many people had originally thought it was going to be. So these three professors decided to put things to a test, a very clever test. They polled people with a whole variety of questions, most of them having nothing to do with Jews, but they divided the pool of interviewees into sort of two parts, and half of them got a question that they would pose about Jews in Israel, but not about Jews in Israel. Half of them got it having to do with other people. For instance, one question was, well, what do you think about Israel trying to be a Jewish state and making it the religion of the land? And half of the interviewees got a question, what do you think about Denmark being officially a Church of Denmark country and providing support for Christian institutions? So theoretically, the responses should have been the same, but they found in the highly educated group that was not the case, that there were far more people who were critical of the Jewish state than they were of Denmark. And it wasn't just one question, of course. They had a whole slew of questions like this.
Oh,
some concerning Israel and Jews, and others concerning who knows what.
well, China, for example.
China,
we
right.
have selective outrage, but then where China is, well, that's okay. But boy, that Israeli state, and it comes down to what we think we're supposed to think. And it defies logic and reason, even in the highly educated. And as you said, hatred and bigotry was linked to ignorance. But in these socially acceptable answers, isn't it interesting that we use our intellect to not only give the right answers, Rabbi, but it seems like we use that intellect to convince ourselves that we're tolerant and we're good and we're just fine. We're in no need of redemption. We're educated. We're just fine.
So I published two pieces, one together with my colleague, Rabbi Cooper, at the Wiesenthal Center, which was published in Media Line and then the Jerusalem Post, and one which I published on my blog. I was, to tell you the truth, I was a little prouder of the one on my blog because I was speaking to actually a more intelligent audience, the people who generally read my blog. But both of them contained this tidbit, that to Jews, the idea of intelligence somehow being less primitive belief simply didn't wash. We recall, if you had to prove it at all, and most of us don't think you have to prove it, the Wannsee Conference, the famous conference in Germany where 12 people got together to work out the details of the final solution of the extermination.
And in that was Nazi Party government officials at this villa in the suburb of Berlin. And these folks were highly educated.
7 out of 12 had doctorates, academic doctorates, 7 out of 12. So we were not surprised. And Jewishly, I think our reaction is something that will resonate with you, Michelle, and with your listeners, that you can't find a necessary correlation or equivalence between education or intelligence, raw intelligence, achieved intellectual ability, and moral intelligence. They are completely separate from each other. And for many of the decisions in life, including an increased number that we delegate to technocrats, as you said, and to people in the academic world, when in fact they are no more qualified and sometimes less qualified to render moral and ethical decisions that would be better made with people who are known to be deep moral thinkers. But we haven't invested in our own thought, and certainly not societally, trying to find good people, because that's like a religious principle. And we don't do those things in the academic world. We don't measure goodness. We're not interested in that because that's, the province of faith and belief. And, there you have by now in America, there's this feeling that those with faith and belief are a little bit intellectually challenged themselves. Religion is for the weak, for the uncomprehending. Religion provides answers to deep questions, but those questions don't plague people with more intelligence and education because they have the answers. Science, other disciplines provide them. So we miss out on the moral, those who excel morally, because we can't even identify them. And in a sense, we look down upon the whole pursuit of identifying them. And then as a result of that, not only aren't we giving the questions to the right people, but we delegate them to people who sometimes are the wrong people, who are into groupthink, into the current academic zeitgeist. That's the German word for, the current of the time. And we do this unconsciously. My favorite example, and I have no idea where you stand on this, Michelle, because I think you're not Catholic. I'm pretty sure you're not. And that is things like defining the beginning of life or the end of life. We have given that over to physicians who say, hey, who has more experience with the beginning and end of life than we do? Therefore, we should make the determination. But that is so utterly wrong and ridiculous. They can describe the physiology of the process of conception and birth and the reverse at the other end, but they are in no better position, and often in a worse position, in defining what so many of us find true by tradition and by intuition, that there is a measured by physiological activity alone. So we've allowed other people to define life, to define death, and we keep on doing this in many, many areas.
It makes me wonder how intelligent we really are. When you think about that, we lack a holistic approach to life. We segment things. You mentioned doctors and life. In our health, we see a symptom and we give a pill to treat that symptom. We don't look at, well, why is this person having this symptom? What is the root cause? What other implications are there? What's their lifestyle? What are they eating? How are they exercising? We just think we'll just treat a symptom. We lack that holistic approach, and our acquiescence to science as God. And I shared this on yesterday's program. Coming back into Seattle on I-5, there's this crazy apartment building or home filled with glass, and they always have these odd neon lights, decorations, fake aliens, mannequins, it's just decorated. But as I was driving through, there was a sign that said, "Science is God." And our acquiescence to science as God, technocrats as elite, it's it's not a full picture, because a dive into that issue gives you similar results as this scientific experiment that they did looking into intelligence and bigotry. Rabbi, brilliant minds of scientific achievement are still unable to look at the evidence laid out before them, that's laid out like a banquet, and recognize order, design, programming, and intelligence in the universe. So similarly, we have people from academia, they can't recognize their own hatred, they can't recognize their need for redemption, and they certainly can't recognize this, can we call it sin, within our own lives.
And part of that is because when people are lauded, as they should be, for the application of their intelligence in the pursuit of human knowledge. We're not anti-academia here. We're not anti-science. Neither of us are. We're just asking for a bifurcation, a split between academic intelligence and moral intelligence. That can only come, it could theoretically come from anyone, but I don't believe anybody is going to pursue that except people in the religious community who are going to stand up for the principle of moral education, of moral intelligence. And people who are lauded for their accomplishment, as I said, they should be, can easily become elitist, and many do.
Very true.
Into a groupthink. Again, here we think it's only the primitive sheep of the masses, the people in the flyover states, who can be manipulated and who just follow blindly whatever is put out there. But there is certainly at least as strong a pressure in the academic world to conform to certain ideas. I got an email message from a friend. I'm not going to identify by name or by location, but a young professor of philosophy in a Christian school. But the school has changed so much in the last couple of years. He told me that he is being accused of white privilege because he refuses to grade students on the basis of race. Sometimes you read these things and you think it's some kind of right-wing extremist saying, this is so terrible and it's happening, and it really isn't, and they're exaggerating. And here in an unsolicited communication from somebody I know is a decent guy and a brilliant thinker, says he's accused of white privilege because he has refused to grade students on the basis of race. Moreover, he has been forced by the school to take a remedial education class for the sin of opening up his classroom to presenting two sides of issues like abortion, definition of marriage, and critical race theory. He doesn't take sides, but students are so offended by being exposed to ideas that they don't think they should have to be exposed to, and the administration agrees with them. We thought snowflakes disappeared a few years ago. They haven't. Not
it's
at all.
A flurry. It's a flurry.
Yeah, well, I think we're down to a blizzard now. He said the irony of it is that some of the students in his classes are heading for law school. And what do you do in law school other than look at two sides of an issue at the same time? But yet, these students who are heading for law school feel offended by having to hear something that does not match the contemporary imposed cultural expectations.
So
of
we
belief.
don't see our own hypocrisy. And that's what is really, to me, a part of what is at the base of this scientific survey, this study, is that there are widespread implications. Indoctrinating children from everything from race, LGBTQ issues, environmentalism, all of those things that we may find important, and they may be important. I'm not judging them based on those issues alone, just saying we indoctrinate only one point of view. But all of that education doesn't curb bad behavior. As we see in this study, it seems we are inclined to sin. We just find more clever ways to do it, as one of your articles was titled, "Smarter Hatred is Still Hatred. The highly educated can do what lesser people cannot." And I wanted to tie it into a scripture, and that's in Job. It's a message from the oldest book, arguably the oldest book in the Bible, from what we understand, to the human race, and it is still applicable today. And it has to do with, to me, knowledge versus wisdom. The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. To shun evil is understanding. We can't really truly shun evil, it would seem, based on this scientific study, if we don't have a fear of the Lord. That is a shocking statement. I'm about to be canceled. Better talk quick before they cancel this broadcast.
And the deeper implication of that is that it's not just that we look in the wrong place for guidance when we shouldn't, but as that verse says, real wisdom is reverence for the Lord, reverence for God. But it's wisdom. It's not just a gut reaction. It's not, yes, I found God and I believe in him, so now I can be a better person. It takes wisdom. It takes real insight. It takes exploration. It takes in-depth study of the human character and of the arguments for God's presence in this world. It takes self-knowledge to be able to implement those things. It is a science. Learning to grow towards God is not just the question of saying, I am a believer and I want that relationship. It has to be worked on. It takes the same kind of work as gaining a 4-year degree in college, maybe a lot longer. It's a work for a lifetime. And we have great works that were devoted, we know, in the Jewish Middle Ages, and then in modern Jewish history. 18th century is modern to us because we've been around for 3,300 years. There's a work called The Path of the Just, which is considered to be a modern day classic, and I know is studied, even though it's a quintessentially Jewish text, but it's translated into English, and I know it's been lauded by people in Christian circles who just like, who appreciate the deep analysis of step-by-step progress towards greater relationship with God. It is a science.
And something interesting, yesterday on our program, we were talking with Dr. Stephen Meyer, who's written a new book called The God Theory, the God Hypotheses, and laying out scientifically with great intellect and utilizing all of the latest research, pointing out that the hypotheses, the potential of God is becoming less and less arguable in science. There is so much evidence, scientific evidence of intelligent design, and even some insight into what that intelligent designer is like, that it would be ridiculous. It's ridiculous to not include a God hypothesis in the world of academia and in the discussion of science and origins. Similarly, in our discussions of COVID and bigotry and issues of the day, it is inane to leave out the possibility that there is a God, because if there is no God, there really is no right or wrong. You can reason it in academia all you want, but you can't prove it, because there is no right or wrong. We are just cold, dark, indifferent. We're going to just rot away when we die. So whatever I do that feels right for me is right for me. You do you, I do me.
And not only for you and me, Michelle, but for the entire human race. There are people who confront their mortality by saying, look, I will die and there is no eternity. There's no heaven and no hell. But I take comfort in the fact that I've made some contribution to human knowledge. Human society will gradually get better. There'll be ups and downs. But as great scientists who are atheists have pointed out, in the end, one day, the solar system will collapse because the sun will burn out, and all of human existence will perish without anything in the universe giving a hoot about their existence. The universe itself is indifferent to man and mankind.
And yet,
I'm going to recommend very strongly for people who want to see this really fleshed out, written by a person who I think is the contemporary C.S. Lewis. He happened to have been an Orthodox Jew, and many Christians are familiar with his works. It's the late Sir Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a book called The Great Partnership, in which he takes a very balanced view of the contributions of science, of what science can provide and what science cannot provide. And he's a clear champion of science, but he shows what it means for people to live without religion. And he goes through the evidence for the existence of God and considers the arguments against. And he does a masterful job. If you have to read only the first chapter, it's worthwhile. The Great Partnership by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
What a beautiful title as well, because there is a partnership, and we are seeing the evidence in our behavior where we'll just take race issues and bigotry. We become so hyper-focused on not being bigots that we become bigots. An example is your professor, who is now being accused of bigotry because of this hyper-focus on bigotry. It is hypocritical, and all of our education, all of our grand knowledge cannot allow us to see our own faults, our own sin, and our own need of redemption. I'm going to give you the final word.
I was afraid of that. I thought you ended it perfectly, Michelle. The final word. I want to emphasize again that although this study concerned anti-Semitism in particular, the implications have very little to do with Jews alone. It has to do with what kind of people believe what and for what reason, and for the ability of people who are highly educated to misuse those talents, and being able to manipulate society as a whole, where other people cannot do that. Now, we should not forget that there's some really, really superb, highly educated people who are firm believers in God. In the non-Jewish community, the first name that comes up in my mind, and I forgot his name, is a devout Catholic who headed the Genome Project, and was the head of this long project to decipher the human genome entirely. And he didn't wind up with less of a conviction in the existence of God, but more. I think my bottom line would be, I'm not ready to debate whether there is such a thing or is no such thing as proof of God's existence. I'm a skeptic about proof. I don't believe in God because of proof. My belief comes from the historical relationship with God over 3,300 years that the Jewish people have had with God, and passed down to the Christian world through this Judeo-Christian legacy. But I will argue that, as you said, the partnership is a real one. For those of us who do believe, when you examine the findings of science, particularly in biology, you're left with, when you start with the conviction that this is engineered by God, by the great designer, then you stand in such awe and wonder for God's intelligence. And it leads to rapturous love of God and wanting to be with him.
And that is the hope for our society. So much so than just education, re-education, and our very loud voices. Thank you. Rabbi Yitzchok Adlerstein is with the Simon Wiesenthal Center's Director of Interfaith Affairs, a friend to this broadcast. He is our beloved rabbi. And if you have been blessed by what we're talking about today, like this, share this. The God story is out there and the world is hungry for it. Let's continue to share it. Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Thanks, Michelle.
More SciTech Talk at mymichellelive.com.